So hello everyone who's connected. So I'm going to start the webinar, allowing for more people to join in the meantime. So I'm Cécile Martin from RAP, and I'm joined today by Hannah Carter and Olivia Shaw from the London Waste and Recycling Board.
Hello.
Hi.
And we're going to talk through to you today about our ECAP activities around engaging consumers. So just to say, this webinar is aimed at organizations who are looking to engage with consumer audiences in relation to textile circularity and influencing them to change behaviors. So just before we actually start, a bit of housekeeping rules. So if you're not on mute already, could you please just check to mute yourself? Also for questions, if you could just please use the chat function as now shown on the screen. So if you'd like to ask a question at any point during the webinar, please use this chat function and then we'll answer questions at the end. Also, please note for your information that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. So what we are going to cover today, so a quick introduction around ECAP, the European Clothing Action Plan. Also, we're gonna basically cover the stats to understand a bit more about the clothing impacts and consumer behaviors across Europe. We're going to take you through the influencing change, so covering what is a behavior change campaign and giving you an example from Love Not Landfill. And eventually we'll finally provide you with some consumer engagement resources from ECAP and also answer your questions. So, quick word on ECAP, so the European Clothing Action Plan, which is a EU funded project that started in 2016 and running until end of this year. That's a project looking to help create a circular approach to textiles in Europe and delivered by 4 partner organizations. So these are RAP, the London Waste and Recycling Board, Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands, and the Danish Fashion Institute. So these 4 partner organizations were working across the whole clothing life cycle, from influencing design practices, engaging consumer, all the way down to improving textile collection rates and integrating post-consumer recycled fibers back into clothing. And today's webinar is really around the engagement piece of people, so engaging European consumers as a whole, and as well engaging young consumers as a specific target. So why adopt a circular approach to textiles? Well, the clothing industry is vitally important in Europe, and its environmental impacts are very high, especially compared to other types of products. So across the EU, clothing is the 8th largest sector in terms of household spending, yet it is ranked 4th in terms of its environmental impact, coming just after housing, transport and food. And the total quantity of clothing consumed in the EU in 2015 was more than 6 million tons, 6.4 million tons exactly. And you can see the environmental footprint is quite significant. So here you can see both the water and the carbon footprint for this total quantity of clothing. It's good to note that the whole life cycle of garments is included in these footprint calculations. So covering everything, all processes from raw material production, production and processes, all the way down to use phase and final disposal of clothing. So in terms of disposal, we've looked at the disposal patterns across Europe, and unfortunately we've seen that the majority of discarded clothing is still going to residual waste, so ending up in landfill or incineration instead of being reused or recycled. In many European countries, there's only 30 to 50% of discarded textiles that are being collected, and this figure gets even lower in large cities. So if you have a look at the figure on the left, you can see the countries where we've studied the clothing waste disposal. So the countries which are in a darker shade are actually the countries with the highest clothing in household residual waste per capita. So these are Italy, Spain, and the UK, which are all in the top 5 countries in terms of level of clothing consumption. So their higher figures of clothing waste arising per capita are particularly worth tackling. And it's also good just to remind about the European Commission Circular Economy Package that stresses the need for more recycling of municipal waste with a specific target for textiles recovery rates, with a target of 60% by 2025. So in order to get even more information, we looked at in more details for specific countries in Europe. And for this, we've conducted an EU clothing survey that was aimed to gather basically information around clothing related behaviors across 4 countries, which you can see here. So the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and Italy. The information gathered basically helped ECAP project for activity planning and reporting. So here in this survey, the final sample size was 1,000 people per country. And for a few questions, we've got data available from an EU-wide omnibus survey, which took place simultaneously to the main fieldwork. So that provides the EU 28 as a whole for a few of these questions. So here you can see some of the key stats for the 4 countries studied in more detail. So we've got behavior stats around repair, washing habits, buying behaviors, also longevity, expected longevity of clothing, and repair skills. So I'm going to now dive into a bit more detail around these clothing related behaviors, starting with buying behaviors. So here this slide combines actually 2 questions that were asked around buying. So the 2 questions were, do you actually examine the themes of new items when you buy new clothing? And here you can see that people in Italy reported that they're far more likely to check seams of clothing when they buy clothing, and that is valid actually for new items of clothing, but as well for second-hand clothing. And similarly, we see that Italy also has reported to check the wardrobe before going on to a shopping trip to see basically what they own before looking at what they need to buy. Looking still in buying behaviors, We've been asking a question around people, so their buying habits. Did they buy new or second-hand clothing? And here the question was really around the last 3 items of clothing that people bought, so excluding anything that was handed down or received for free. And here you can see that all 4 countries show limited levels of consideration for buying second-hand. It's mostly buying new clothing. However, Denmark, it's worth to note that Denmark is the most likely to consider and purchase second-hand clothing, with 5% of the panel reporting that they have bought second-hand without even considering buying new clothing. So quite remarkable stats just to highlight here. Moving on to washing behaviors. So this is a question that was asked specifically at the 4 countries studied. And here the questions was around the number and size of wash loads. So in a typical week, how many of the following types of washing loads will your household do? And here on the graph, you can see the average number given in each category of the wash loads. So washing behaviors appear to be quite different across the 4 countries here. But notably, Germany appeared to use their washing machines far less frequently on average compared to the 3 other countries. In terms of washing temperature, we asked the question about what temperature do you use most frequently when washing clothes? So 40 degrees wash temperature is still the most popular temperature in that is valid for the EU 28 countries, with 30 degrees being the next mostly used one. So these 2 settings, 30 and 40 degrees, account for around 2/3 of all households, and the third reported wash temperature mostly used is still a significant proportion, with 12% of most frequent washes done at 60 degrees. So moving on to the longevity estimates, the average active lifespan of clothing. So here the results are aggregated for 9 clothing categories evaluated. And we can see that generally speaking, households in Denmark have the longest expecting longevity for their items of clothing, and quite significantly higher than all the other nations for most of clothing items. So again, something to note here for Denmark households. And finally, moving on to disposal behaviors. So here we looked at what routes would households choose for disposing of clothing items. So that we asked the question for in the last year, what routes did you choose to discard your clothing? And here you can see there's quite significant differences in disposal methods across the 4 countries. So Denmark and Italy seem to be using quite a lot the charity shop route quite often. That compares to only 18% doing so in Germany. Germany, on the contrary, appears to be using far more the bring banks, so the clothing collection banks, as well as the charity bags that are collected from the houses. But still, it's good to note that still lots of clothes are going in the general rubbish bin. That is the 3rd mostly reported route for disposing of used clothing, onto which we should actually add these figures for clothing disposed of at the local household recycling center, but still being disposed of in the general waste section. So really a missed opportunity here. So looking at all these behaviors, we see there's quite room for improvement on some of these behaviors. And these are basically the target behaviors that were identified as a result of that whole EU clothing survey. So we segmented our activity and messages into 3 main categories, which are buying clothes, the use space covering both care and repair of clothing, and the final disposal of clothing. So the target example of target behaviors, for example, for buying, it's all about choosing clothes that are better made, easy to care for, and made to last, or buy pre-loved clothing. For care repair, it's all about look after your laundry with some stain removal tips and repair or altering guidance. In the disposal phase, the strongest message around is really don't bin your clothes, but sell them on, swap, donate, or recycle. So after doing this little exercise, basically, we developed material. In order to develop material and test activities, this is how we segmented the 3 categories, and from there we were able to identify some example intervention to test. So what is a behavior change campaign and how to build it? So there are loads of different theories and models for behavior change campaign. Every campaign needs to consider what model is applied and tested, but generally there is a core set of campaign rules. And these rules are basically summarized here. So these are the key considerations for building and running a behavior change campaign. So it is all about the aim. What do you want to achieve? And having the full brief that covers basically who you want to target. So who's your audience? What channels are you going to use to deliver your messages? So what are the top messages you want to get across? How are you going to test your messages with your audience? And obviously have a clear and concise call to action that people actually can take take action. Obviously, there is the last part about how how you measure the results of your behavior change campaign, which is quite hard, but usually you will look at how what was the reach of your campaign with your target audience directly. And basically this is where I'm going to pass on to Hannah to give you an example of behavior change campaign with Love Not Landfill that covers all these key elements. So Hannah.
Thank you very much, Cecile. Okay, so Love Not Landfill is the campaign. It's the Young Consumer Action Area for the European Clothing Action Plan. And we were tasked with talking to 16 to 24-year-old Londoners in how they buy, care for and dispose of clothing. So there's many reasons why this campaign needed to happen, but for us the big figure was the 300,000 tons of clothes that go to landfill every year in the UK. And you have to put that against the fact that 100 billion items of clothing are produced every year globally. And this has led to the UK having a clothing consumption problem. And so what we wanted to do is speak to young people in London and build their awareness and change their behaviour, because this is one of the key elements. There's obviously supply chain and brands that need to look at this too, but if we can get young people to start to think about how they can buy their clothes differently, then we feel like we're going to be moving forward. So for this presentation, rather than going through the general activities of the campaign, which we will touch on, we're not going to go into detail there. We want to focus more closely on our engagement strategies, particularly for events and for our social media. So the overarching strategy and messages for the campaign for Love Not Landfill were that we want to engage young people in a series of events, initiatives and activities. and increase their understanding of how clothes impact the environment. Going back to Cecile's slide about the elements of behavior change, we were kind of tapping into those along the way. We want to make it easy for them to take action and to incentivize that action as well. So our messages, after researching our audience at the beginning, we came out with that we want them to buy secondhand, to care, mend and repair, and to recycle all their clothes, never putting anything in the bin. So what they can do, use a clothes bank, give to charity, or swap. So we started to get involved with our audience. We had a youth panel, we did some activity in schools, and the events along the way have meant we've spent a lot of time with them and we're understanding them a lot better. So this has obviously grown through the campaign. At the beginning, we wanted to know who they are, where they go, what they watch, what they read, and what they listen to. And this, of course, is where the social media channels become so relevant. For Love Not Landfill, it was about fashion, it's about clothes, and it has to be very visual. And so Instagram was going to be our key channel the whole way through. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. Facebook, we weren't going to focus on, but we found that as we started to partner with other brands, Facebook became quite key. Also YouTube, we know that our influencers that we're working with were big on YouTube and that their audiences were seeing them there. And we wanted to know what these audiences knew about fashion and the environment. And that was what took us to kind of to separate them into 3 different sections. So on the slide there, we're calling the converted, the eco-curious and the unaware. So Jasmine Hemsley in the green stripy dress was doing quite a lot with sustainable fashion brands, and she was very keen to be involved with us. So T in the middle is a Depop seller. She's selling secondhand clothes via Depop, which is a contribution to the fashion, the sustainable fashion cause in itself, but she wanted to kind of learn more about that and sort of expand on it. And also then we have Lizzie, who was up on YouTube doing hauls with Pretty Little Thing and Misguided, but was starting to look at things like vegan makeup. So we picked up on that as we did our research and thought maybe she was someone we could bring along with us, and of course her huge YouTube following at the same time. So our campaign elements, as London Waste and Recycling Board, we had some connections. Working with textile recycler LM Barry was a key part of our campaign, and so clothes banks was always going to be something we wanted to do. We found after we talked to our youth panel at the beginning that young people were prepared to use them, but clothes banks just weren't coming across them in their daily lives. So we decided that we wanted to put the clothes banks where those people were going. We also wanted to do a pop-up shop. We felt that a space that showed the best second-hand clothing that London had to offer was definitely going to be a way of telling young Londoners that second-hand is an alternative to high street fashion in terms of price and style and quality. So for the pop-up and the other events, we engaged influencers and charities that had a high social media following to increase our reach. So we were starting, Love Not Landfill didn't exist before April 2017. So we were starting from zero. So we had to connect with organizations and influencers that had following so that we could quickly start to increase that. Finally, all our campaign elements had to be visual for the Instagram element. We wanted them to be exciting and interesting to the audience as well, and giving them everything they need to share, follow and support the campaign. So the icons there are the Instagram like, the Instagram comment and share, and of course retweet on Twitter. Those were very key. So everything we thought of in those terms and in that context. So we needed visual cues, and they need to be part of every bit of our campaign. So the first one there is original imagery. So the image is taken from our photo shoot. We completed a photo shoot using clothes from our pop-up partner charities. And we now have a whole stack of images that are great, that speak to our target audience in many ways, and are all secondhand clothes. So we're using them not only in the pop-up, but across the campaign as well. The statistic is something that has been used by us on our social, but also shared by followers. A statistic is an easy way for people to be shocked and to then understand what's going on and to decide, as soon as they share that around to their followers, they're stating that they get this and they're part of this, and sort of show it's very shareable. The interactive elements in our events was another key part of it. So there you have the Bambi image along with a pledge that I promised to never throw clothes in the bin. This was at our pop-up just last week with Depop. And what we were doing, getting people to come in, taking Polaroids of the influencers of some of our shoppers and putting them up there with that. So they're saying, then of course they can share that, saying that they have made this pledge, and by making it public, they're so much more likely to actually do it. So that we felt was quite strong. The Bambi image in the middle there, we call that Bambi because it's done by the street artist Bambi. We engaged her at the beginning of the campaign to come up with something that would be spray painted onto our clothes banks. So 5 of our banks have this image on, but it's become much bigger than that over time as the campaign has rolled on. So we're using it in everything we do, across our media communications and in our event spaces as well. So it's easy now hopefully becoming more easily recognizable as a Love Not Landfill image. The guest wall is another interactive thing that we did in the first pop-up. So people can write something on there, make their own pledge or agree with what we're doing, and then snap it and share it onto their own channels. The bank design there, we have 5 Bambi banks and 15 of these Love Not Landfill banks. They're just very bold, huge calls to action, hashtags so people can get on social with them, and just making them as obvious and bright as possible so that they're used on social and also noticed as you walk past them in the street. And finally, that is an image, Liv, we did a swap and screen event for Circular Economy Week at the London Waste and Recycling Board office. And Liv came up with this idea of making popcorn cones out of magazine pages and branding them, and it was perfect for the people coming along. They snap them, they like it, they think it's quite cute, and obviously it's all about recycling, and it went up on a few Instagram posts as well. So that kind of thing is what we're wanting to do throughout the campaign. So next, influencers. This is going back to the fact that we were a startup campaign. We had no following. So we wanted to connect with influencers that did have followings. So the first 2 images there are Lily Cole, who is a model and sustainable fashion activist. When we launched our clothes banks in September, we did engage her through our PR agency, Barley Communications. They got in touch with her people and she really loved what we were doing and did a great social media post on Twitter that got a good following. She has 87.5 thousand followers, so that was quite high impact for us. Also, Stacey Dooley, who presented Fashion's Dirty Secrets, which was a BBC documentary that went out last year in September. It was around the same time as our Clothes Banks launch. We actually met up with her by coincidence at Copenhagen Fashion Summit and talked a bit about what we were doing. And so again, we got in touch with her people when we launched the banks, and she was great, and she retweeted one of our tweets, which to 726,000 followers was very, very useful. So that was great. And then the rest of the pictures on there are the influencers that we have worked with on our campaign. So various different profiles matching in with our target audience groups. So we have some eco-conscious, Venetia Falconer and Hannah from Paloma in Disguise. And of course, we have the confetti crowd up there who are getting on their journey with sustainable fashion, but were definitely part of it. Their style definitely lent themselves to secondhand clothing. And then we have Lizzie and Adiola again, who are just starting to think about clothes and fashion and how the environment is affected, and they have huge followings, so we're very happy with them. So finally, the picture in the middle is the panel. We worked with Kontiki, who are a travel company, and by getting that group of, I'm not going to go through them all, but various sustainable fashion activists in a room in front of an audience that maybe weren't quite there yet was really quite impactful. Okay, so then brand partnerships. We were approached by some of these brands and we approached some others to, again, use their following and their audience to boost our own and talk to more people. So Topshop, we have a clothes bank, one of the Bambi banks in there. Along with that, they did some social for us. So that's obviously 9.8 million on Instagram. Depop came into our first pop-up, and we just completed a pop-up all with Depop sellers. Absolutely perfect audience for us. Between, I think their sort of average is 14 to 20 is the Depop buyers and sellers, so that's perfect. Skinny Dip is another very young brand. We went to do a lunchtime talk in their offices, which they put some items on social about that. Kontiki, the travel agency, approached us, as I mentioned earlier, for a holiday wardrobe swap. They were brilliant, catching on the fact, which has also gone big with the Bernardo's campaign this summer, about holiday wardrobes and people buying clothes just to go on holiday, and in some cases even just leaving them behind on holiday, which is awful. So we wanted to, when they came up with that, we absolutely jumped at the chance to be part of it. Ealing Broadway Shopping Centre is another Bambi bank, 15 million in footfall every year. But the great thing there is that the average person goes there between 60, I think around 60 times a year. So that bank is filling up on a weekly basis. So for actually collecting clothes, that's amazing, but also really big awareness with them. And on another shopping centre, Westfield London, Shepherd's Bush, 37 million footfall a year. And we have a bank in there as well, which is doing quite well. So yeah, brand partnerships with their followings and people that see them is incredibly helpful. Okay. So just moving on quickly, strategies at our events. This is where we are getting our hashtag and our handle in as many places as we can at our events so that it gets caught up in posts. You can see there somebody is actually snapping the hashtag that we put on our mirrors in the pop-up shop. So by them, we know they're going to try on clothes, we know they're going to take pictures of themselves. Immediately they take that picture. We don't have to rely on them remembering to tag us or use the hashtag because it's right there in the mirror already. So, and there's various other items there that we've used as well. Okay. So now I'm going to pass on to Olivia, who's going to talk. She's our kind of social expert and is going to talk more about strategies she's brought in on social.
Yeah, so focusing on strategies specifically within the social media aspect of our campaign. So obviously our target audience is 16 to 24, and with that, social media is a crucial part of our campaign and reaching that audience. In general, there's 3.2 billion people use social media, which is 42% of the population. So with that stat in mind, it is a really crucial element. I just want to focus on these points on the screen for how we kind of boost and focus on social media. Whether paid or organic, I always consider kind of these following things. So location targeting is really important. Whether it's a static post or promotional advert, directed specific location targeting is really, really important. So for example, if I post a general Instagram post, I'll make sure that I tag London so that anyone within London generally will see it. And then moving more specifically, if I've got an advert that's I put out during an event, I'll then use the radius tool within Instagram to target. So for example, last week at our Depop pop-up, I made the radius 3 kilometers around the shop so that anyone passing by would then hopefully have that advert pop up on their screen, which would obviously then in turn lead them to visiting the shop. Audience targeting, again, whether paid or organic, you can choose to target this. However, the difference is that with organic, the content that you can do is, it's basically down to wording and the tone of voice. So because our audience is quite young, I try to make sure that I don't use overcomplicated words. I use abbreviations so that they can kind of quickly read and understand what we're talking about. And then if it's paid, you can go into kind of more specific details such as age range, location again, and interests. So interests are really important in that not only do I always put fashion or kind of clothing as interests, I kind of go a bit further out. So considering art or music, brunch, just all kind of surrounding interests that will target our audience. Timing is another element that's really important. So being reactive and scheduling, both are really key. I use tools such as Planoly to schedule Instagram posts and TweetDeck for Twitter, and then also ensure that I post different kind of posts along with kind of news and what's going on generally. And then lastly, the language. So wording, tone is really important. and staying true to our brand personality throughout is really key. For example, like I said earlier, using abbreviations such as OMG, so that we are kind of talking within our target audience's language. And then finally, financial, so boosting. So if we've got any extra budget, I make sure that I will put a significant amount along with the adverts for the events, but also if there's a specific post that we've posted that for some reason is just doing really, really well, I'll make sure to jump on that and react to that straight away and just put some ad spend behind that to make it go a bit further.
Okay, so just to come back, we want to talk about just a couple of key learnings. We can't go into all of them, we've learned a lot, but one thing was on the audience. So as I mentioned, we started off with a youth panel. At the time, we were trying to conserve budget to save it for the activity that we knew was going to come. But with hindsight, it would have been better to spend more on that youth panel and bringing them along with us on the journey. Exactly how we would have done it, I'm not sure, but I feel like we could have got a lot more out of them if we'd got more involved and got them involved a bit more and incentivized them better. So that's one thing, if we went again, that's something that we would do. And Liv is just going to talk about some learnings from social as well, because there's quite a few of those.
Yeah, so there's four main areas that I feel are really important to note. The first is the quality of image. So you can see on the left-hand side the two pictures of banks. The top image is just an image of the banks in our warehouse. Now, I would not post that on social, whereas the image below it is one, it's actually in the Lewisham shop. So there I've cropped the image, I've put a filter on it, and kind of what we've learned is that one high quality image is much better than 10 average. Then the second thing is budget constraints. So we don't have a huge amount of budget behind us, and therefore social is one of the kind of small elements we have budget for. So what has actually kind of naturally happened is that those that come to our events kind of that want to ask and get involved, I can use. So the top three images there are of a student from Nottingham called Jessica Pearson. She came to our Kentucky event in February and just said that she loves what we do and that she is a photographer and loves to get involved. So one way that I've kind of built a relationship with her and obviously then saved money is by using her. She's used these images in her project. They're all secondhand clothing, and it's also images that we can then use in our socials to kind of boost and post around our campaign as well. There are apps that I use to help save budget and time, which I mentioned earlier, which are Plurally and TweetDeck. And then the fourth and last thing, which is a very recent thing I've started to do, is you can see on the bottom hand of the screen, so there's a hashtag sustainable fashion. We had a social media workshop with a company called Social Brighton about a month ago. And one of the suggestions that they made is that if you spend a bit of time, maybe twice a week, following hashtags that are relevant to your campaign and ensuring that you kind of interact and respond to them. So I follow Sustainable Fashion, I'll go on there and I'll look at posts that people have linked using that hashtag and I'll comment or follow their profiles. And that's really helped our engagement and also increased our following massively. I just want to drill down and focus a bit more on our Instagram engagement. So there's been recently, following is obviously very important, but as of late there is quite a lot of Instagram fraud going on, and so engagement's actually a lot more important to focus on than your following. So focusing on organic versus paid, these two images on screen are our highest engagement of organic posts, which was on the left, and then our highest engagement rate for our paid posts, which is the right. What's really interesting is that the top organic posts on the left was misguided. That got 344 likes and was had 19 comments. And the top paid for post was only £20 I put behind it, but that got a similar 440 and 14 comments. So even there's not actually that much difference in terms of spend, but the organic post being so relevant, again, that was a reactive one, got such a high engagement. It's also really important, really interesting actually to note the insights this gives to our audience. So we're trying to reach those that are buying from Misguided and Boohoo and that buy kind of cheap disposable clothing so that we can try and influence them even just to start thinking about secondhand clothing and sustainable fashion. And what this shows is two things. One, that we actually are potentially not connecting with the audience we're targeting initially, because what you could assume is that those are liking this picture on the left already know about sustainable fashion and agree with us and are saying that actually a £1 bikini is not sustainable and is not kind of what you should be doing. But also that too is that sustainable fashion is growing in awareness, and people are starting to push back and starting to kind of ask these questions and put pressure on brands that are operating in this space.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through campaign results. So for Love Not Landfill, these are our numbers for 2018 and 19. So 2018, you can see, was very good. We had the big figure there is the physical connection. We did the big pop-up shop in November, which really boosted that. But what's interesting is then if we launched in April 2018, and those were the numbers we got that year. Since January 2019, about the same amount of time, those are the numbers. These are not added up. This is, again, what we've got. So far this year, our reach has almost doubled. Our engagement has almost doubled. Physical connection is down, but that's because we haven't done any big events. That will be coming up at the end of the year. And our followers, we're on twice the amount of followers in the same time this year than we were last year. So momentum is obviously the key thing there, and us just continuing to keep going and with all the strategies we've talked through before. Just one figure hot off the press, we just found out today, WRAP have completed the second consumer survey, so the survey done at the end of the, or towards the end of the activity. And we found that 32% of young Londoners have heard of Love Not Landfill, which is something we're very happy about. So finally, just next steps. There will be a campaign report on Love Not Landfill for ECAP when ECAP closes at the end of this year. That will be available for everybody. Love Not Landfill 2019, we have another 5 months, which will be full of events and brand partnerships. Beyond 2019, LWARB would like to keep this campaign going, but we need funding to do that. So as well as doing the various activities, we are now on the hunt for funding to keep it going. So that's basically it from us.
Thank you, Hannah and Liv. That was really good to hear all about Love Not Landfill, including basically your campaign results and for sharing your learnings. I think that's really helpful. In terms of other resources now that are accessible for everyone, actually, so for resources to help you engage with your consumer audiences, basically you just have to go and visit our ECAP website, so ecap.eu.com, where you can find resources such as campaign packs. So that's what you can see in the middle. So these are consumer campaign packs based on Love Your Clothes, brand guidelines, and consumer messaging guidance. They are fully customizable packs with materials, ideas, and guidance to help you kickstart your own consumer messaging campaign. These campaign packs are available for Denmark, the Netherlands, Italy, and Germany. You can also find case studies, so case studies and action plans. We've got 14 in total. That's to really aid planning and delivery. So these include how to set up a swap shop, how to engage local authorities, upcycling clothing for charity, or setting up a staff clothing drive. And on there you can also find obviously all the test and learn activities that we run across Europe, including activity run in the Netherlands through a partner called Milieu Central that worked on developing some web content to provide hints and tips for consumers to help them care and repair for their clothes better. Also part of that, we've put the social media campaigns that were run in Bologna, Italy, with Recooper, and in Wales in the UK, basically to encourage to keep clothing out of the bin and increase the quantity of used clothes collected. So you can find all these in more detail on the ECAP website. And this is basically where we end, and we're going to thank you for your attention and open actually now for any questions. So I think we had some questions in the chat while we were talking.
Hi, so I've just seen the question, why no male influencers? That is an excellent question, and it's a bit of an omission on our part. There were some male influencers, so particularly the most crucial was George from Basement 6. He was one of our Depop sellers at the pop-up shop in November. So selling menswear. T also was selling menswear in the shop as well. So we did try and push out there that it was there were menswear and womenswear in the pop-up. Our Depop shop that we just finished last week also had 2 menswear sellers in there as well. So we didn't engage them as influencers. They weren't quite the same level as George was, but yes, we have had men in there. The fact remains, fashion and the tone of their campaign is more female. It just is, but we are absolutely focused. We're on our next pop-up shop. We're going to make sure we have a bit of a bigger offering for menswear. So thank you for asking that.
And just on the question of which app that I use for post planning, it's called Planoly. It's spelled plan and then OLY. It's specifically for Instagram.
Okay, question for Cecile.
So there was a question.
Did you do the same research, same usage research in the UK?
So yes, coming back onto the survey. So we had figures actually from RAP on the consumer survey. Consumer research survey from a few years ago. So we compared this with the first wave of the EU clothing survey that was run in November 2016. And as Anna said, now we've got results. We are just having results of the second wave of this EU clothing survey. So yes, we do have some figures for the UK. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, we ask a few more questions for the EU 28 through the Omnibus survey. So for a few questions, we also have more recent research results for the UK as well. Any more questions? Do we have more online? So maybe, I don't know, maybe we can just open the microphone for people who would like to ask questions now, or...
Just had a thank you, a fantastic presentation.
All right, so if there's any more questions, this is where we're gonna actually close the webinar, and thank you very much for your attention and very good questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to put the recording of this webinar to be made available for all you who participated and joined. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And have a great day. Bye-bye.